Thanks to Shopify for supporting Future Hindsight. Shopify is a platform designed for anyone to sell anywhere, giving entrepreneurs like myself the resources once reserved for big business. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/hopeful, all lowercase. And if you want to support Future Hindsight in 2025, join the Civics Club on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Future Hindsight now. Hey, speaking of 2025, don't forget to pick up your very own Future Hindsight desk calendar. It's small, stylish, and will keep you on your toes to be the spark all through the year. All right, let's get to the episode. Welcome to Future Hindsight, a podcast on a mission to spark civic action. I'm your host, Mila Atmos. I'm a global citizen based in New York City, and I'm deeply curious about the way our society works. So each week, I bring you conversations to cut through the confusion around today's most important civic issues and share clear, actionable ways for us to build a brighter future together. After all, democracy is not a spectator sport. Tomorrow starts right now. We believe that organizing is going to be a huge part of engaging and practicing democracy, especially with Trump 2.0 around the corner. But how do we get started with organizing? To help us gain our footing, we are joined by Elyssa Feder. She's the co-founder and executive director of Rising Organizers, which has trained nearly 4,000 activists and held 14 intensive fellowship cohorts on community organizing skills. She was also selected for Washingtonian Magazine's 40 Women Under 40 issue in 2020. Welcome, Elyssa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
So we believe that we are in a time post-election that requires organizing among everyday people, something that goes well beyond mobilizing people to vote. But I think organizing is a broadly used term that is understood differently by different people. How do you think about organizing? What is organizing anyway?
This is a great question, and of course, the place where we start all of our intro to organizing trainings. People talk a lot about organizing. It is a common part of the way that we talk about civic engagement and democracy, but what that means and how you get started doing it can be very unclear. And so we have a very broad definition of organizing, which is gathering people together to fight for, to act toward a set of policy, social, or community goals. And we keep this definition quite broad because organizing is kind of a Swiss Army knife. In some ways, it can be used to achieve lots of different tools, lots of different goals at any given time. And so, though we know this definition is broad, we also have some parts of it that are really specific. You are gathering people together. Organizing is not something that you can do by yourself. You have a certain set of goals in mind. You are not just sort of out here floundering through the world, seeing what sticks. And so organizing can be something as specific as organizing a tenants union within your apartment building or something as large as changing national policy. The good thing about that is that the skills and the tools to do that on a hyper-local level and the skills and the tools to do that on a national level are incredibly similar. And it's all about getting started right where you are with the tools and the resources you already have at your disposal. And so our job at Rising Organizers is to make that as clear a pathway as possible.
So if we're thinking about the long game with organizing as a tool, a Swiss Army knife, which is what you just said, tell us about your theory of change. What is the power of organizing?
Our theory of change is that if more everyday people know how to organize in their communities, we will have a more responsive government that is reflective of the needs of everyday people. Right now, we have a really serious challenge in our democracy at all levels and across party, which is that everyday people are seeing their cost of living go up, are seeing that their government representatives are not as responsive to them and their needs as they would prefer. And many people feel really unsure about what to do about this really serious problem. Organizing gives everyday people the tools that they need to be effective in mobilizing their community and motivating, moving their elected officials to be more responsive to them and their needs. And so that is why it is that we invest in particular in making sure that people know how they can bring organizing to their community every day.
So often we think that grassroots organizing builds a foundation from which we can affect change, or getting our elected representative to actually represent us, and even build successful social movements. Give us an example of change as a result of organizing. I'm thinking maybe of women's suffrage or gay marriage and how through continuous activism, some milestones, some Overton windows were moved that changed public opinion and support. But what is a story that you like to tell that shows that organizing works?
This is a great question and really the basis of what we do at Rising Organizers, because when you look at the history of American democracy, the things that have fortified that democracy, that have moved it forward towards a more just and equitable democracy, have been organizers. From, as you mentioned, the right to vote for women, to the civil rights movement, to gay marriage, all of these were led by ordinary people, individuals fighting with their community for more rights. And so there are many stories out there that illustrate this point. What you just named are a couple of examples that we like to cite a lot, so I'm glad that you brought those in. One of my favorite examples that is not as well known is the Fight for the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is, of course, a piece of civil rights legislation in the United States that was fought for by organizers. And there's a particularly famous action that these organizers took, actions being anything you do to move your policy forward. So often we think of protests. When we think about actions, those are the most public form of taking action, but they're not the only form. Anyway, so the movement for disability rights had this action called the Capitol Crawl, where people who used mobility aids literally crawled up the steps of the U.S. Capitol to demonstrate how inaccessible their government was to them. And this led pretty directly to the passing of the ADA, which is really, in many ways, a global standard for legislation that is both protective of and extends the rights of people with disabilities.
Right, that's a great example.
Yeah, we use it in our PowerPoints. This example is one that I really love to cite because we live with the benefits of organizing every day. Every time you get in an elevator in a public building, that is because organizers fought for that elevator. They were fighting for it for people with disabilities who needed it, but they were also fighting, I broke my ankle earlier this year. They are also fighting for the times where I need to have greater access. And so this is a great example of incredibly powerful legislation that came from impacted people fighting for their needs that we just live with every day and don't even think about anymore. So that's my favorite example.
Yeah, thank you. So if I'm interested in organizing, but I've never done it before, where do I start?
This is where I will be extremely biased, but also correct and say to come to a Rising Organizers training. Rising Organizers runs free trainings for emerging organizers across the country. And we define emerging organizers as anyone who recognizes that there is a problem and wants to do something about it, which I would venture is every single person listening to this podcast.
Right. So, tell us about what happens at these training sessions.
Yeah, so we have two forms of trainings. One is our in-person trainings in the DC metro area. Our next training is going to be on January 21st at MLK Library for those of you who are DC-based. And we're also going to be having a virtual training in early February for those of you who do not have the great fortune of living in our nation's capital. And what we do at these intro to organizing trainings is talk a little bit about this Swiss Army knife and how to use it. What are the ways in which you can identify the issue that's most important to you? Who is already doing work in your community and how do you get in touch with them? How do you identify what are the most useful skills that you have as a person? And how do you want to commit to using them to protect and expand our democracy? We take a really strong asset-based approach. We believe that everyone has something to contribute to organizing work across issues and spectrums. And so we really want people to think about, based on who you are now, where you are, the communities you're already involved in, the skills you already have, what are you going to do? And that is the question that we help folks answer over the course of the training.
So you help people identify their own skill set or help them hone in where they can use their skill set.
Exactly.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yes. But so having said that, though, there are some basic organizing skills, I'm assuming, and I don't know if that's true, that everybody should learn. If there are, what are the basic organizing skills that we should all learn?
The most important organizing skill is building relationships. That is about getting out in your community, talking to people you probably already know, but you've never talked to them about, why does this pothole exist? Or why does my representative feel so far away from my everyday needs? Most of us already live in some amount of community. We already have at least some relationships. But because we're raised to not talk politics at the dinner table, that is often something that we don't actually do. And so the most important core skill of organizing is being able to build relationships with the people around you around shared goals. But in order to do that, you also need to figure out a second skill or build a second skill, which is figuring out what you're going to focus on in the first place. We live in a world with many challenges and many problems. And rightfully, people feel pulled in many different directions at any given time. And what we encourage folks to do is to figure out, where is your passion and where are your skills and where do those things overlap? It is okay to pick something. In a world with this many problems, it is okay to focus. I would much rather someone focus and do it over the long term and bring people with them. So those are the two core skills that we teach in our Organizing 101 trainings, and also how we get deeper into those skills as we run more trainings.
Right. This is really good advice, to focus on something and do it over the long run. I mean, we do definitely believe that you can't really engage in something that you're not passionate about, because then you'll just give up. You'll do it for, 2 months, 3 months, and then you're like, what is it? It's like February of any year, and you have given up on your gym membership. But so I'm curious about how Rising Organizers came to be. You've been organizing for a long time, and you co-founded this organization. Tell us about your origin story, and how is Rising Organizers different than other organizing outfits?
So Rising Organizers was founded in November of 2016 as a response to a crisis in our democracy. We are a nonpartisan organization. And also we see that there are particular threats that are posed by particular radical factions of the anti-democratic movement in the United States. And I and my friends, we were all organizers together, put up this training called Organizing for Non-Organizers, and thought maybe 20 people would show up, and 150 people showed up, and they just kept coming. And so it became really clear that we were onto something, that there were a lot of people in the DC metro area and nationally who wanted to be organizing and didn't know how to start. And building that kind of pipeline from panic to doing something was a place where we had a unique ability to act and to invest in these folks. For a long time, we just looked at our audience, spoke with our audience to figure out what it is that they needed so we could meet their needs. We didn't want to be duplicative. And one of the things that we came across was that we could do a lot of investment in individual leadership. And so that is where a lot of the programs have come from. We're figuring out not just how to train people, but also how to do as much individualized leadership development as possible. The thing that makes us different from other organizations and other training institutions, and there are many excellent training institutions in this country, is that we focus on long-term leadership development and building hyper-local democratic, lowercase d, infrastructure. And so what that means is that we don't just train someone and send them on their way. We train someone and then we continue to be in community with them and continuing to grow their skills over time. So by way of example, we have this intensive fellowship program, and our first fellowship program was in the fall of 2017. We are now 7 years out from that program, coming into 7.5. And 81% of that first class is still organizing, including many people who are organizing directly with Rising Organizers. And that's because of the long-term leadership development that we do and the way that we're able to create long-term change. It is not just about the trainings. It is about the actual impact that people have after the trainings.
Tell me a little bit more about these long-term leadership trainings. Like, what does that mean, a long-term leader?
When we are talking about our fellowship program, which is the way that we're able to get the most in-depth about our leadership development goals, that is an intensive program that we run twice a year. It's 9 sessions, and it is actually run by alumni of the fellowship program. So these are folks who basically volunteer their time to teach the next generation of leaders how they can organize too in a program that they themselves went through. It's intergenerational, it's multiracial program that allows for folks to work across different issue areas and to meet other people who are as committed to social change as they are. The way that we build long-term change is by not just training these folks, but continuing to stay in relationship with them after they are done with the fellowship program. So we have this whole cycle of organizing and cycle of change that brings people into our trainings and then continues to coach them, to place them with organizations that are doing the work they already care about, and then continues to provide them with free coaching, leadership development, et cetera, for at this point, the rest of their lives. We'll see where life takes me, but at least at present, I've been organizing some of these folks for almost a decade, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
So basically, you're placing them in jobs. Did I get that right?
So sometimes it's a job, and sometimes it's not at all. Often, our leaders go on to be what is often called a super volunteer at organizations that are doing work that they care about. Our perspective is actually that in order for us to build a just multiracial democracy, the goal should not just be that everybody works in the democracy sector. Mm-hmm. The goal should be that everyday people, everybody who is impacted by policy, which is everyone, has the ability to organize within their communities. And sometimes that does translate to a job because people love organizing and they want to do it. And sometimes that doesn't translate to a job at all. Instead, it is being a leader in some sort of other community organization. And so we help folks, yes, get jobs, but also we help folks simply achieve their goals. And sometimes that is just being a really great volunteer.
Yeah, I think just simply being a great volunteer is actually not just simple. I think I think a lot of people, life gets in the way, and I mean that in the purest sense. You have children, you have jobs, you have parents, whatever it is, and organizing is not necessarily something that you can always fit in, although I think that it could be like a lifestyle, like going to the gym, right. Going back to that earlier analogy. I have a question about the people who showed up in the beginning because you thought only 20 people would show up, and then more people showed up when you kept doing it. So who were the initial people who showed up, and how have they changed over time? How have the participants evolved in the kind of people?
The people that came to our first training and the audience that we serve now are pretty similar. So I'll talk about them both. And we've really done a lot to measure the kinds of folks that come to our programs as we've evolved as an organization. The majority of folks who come to our programs then and now are young people, relatively young people. We define young people as under 35. Are people of color. We have around 68% folks of color who come through our trainings, and are women and non-binary people, which it makes up about 71% of our audience. These three groups, young people, women, and people of color, are often termed by people far smarter than me as the new American majority, people who are really coming up in our democracy and are going to set the future for what the rest of our lives and our society looks like. And so we're really excited that we get to be at the forefront of training that new American majority, and that audience has stayed relatively consistent since our first trainings in 2016.
Great. Well, it's interesting you mentioned this new American majority because I was looking at on your website and on your mission and vision statement page, you also state your organization's values. Tell us about your values and how they inform your organizing.
So we have a series of values on our website, and if folks go to the About Us page and scroll down, and those values were created by alumni of our fellowship program. So as you can start to pick up, this whole organization is a self-feeding planter. People who go through the program are fundamentally changed by it. They will tell you that. And they continue to invest in the future of the organization. And so our values were created by a collective of people who had graduated from the fellowship program. And those values include humility. We know we don't have all of the answers. We just know that we have a tool set that we want to share with people. A commitment to anti-racism, making sure that we are building a just democracy for everyone who's a part of it. That we are responsive to the needs of our people rather than being caught up in process for its own sake. And that we believe organizing is for everybody. And that is one of our core values, and that is the way that we have shaped all of our programs going forward. So I'm really proud of our values list, both because it's incredibly reflective of who we are as an organization, and also because it was built by the people who make up this organization, which is to say alumni of our programs.
Yeah, I love that the alumni banded together with you and put this together. We'll be right back with Elyssa Feder, so stay with us. I promise you don't want to miss this episode's Civic Spark. One small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, 2025. It's here, a brand new year, exciting and scary. And maybe you're thinking, how am I going to make this year different? How am I going to build something for myself? Or perhaps I'm dying to be my own boss or see if I can turn that business idea I've been kicking around into a reality, but I just don't know how to make it happen. Well, Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. And with the new year here, there's no better time to start your new business than right now. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. No coding or design skills required. Really, all you need to know how to do is drag and drop. Shopify's powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts that help you sell everywhere people scroll. So, how does Shopify make it easy to manage your growing business? I'm glad you asked. How? They help with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments, all from one single dashboard, allowing you to focus on the important stuff, like growing your business. But what if you don't act now? What happens? Will you regret it? What if someone beats you to the idea? Listen, don't kick yourself when you hear this again in a year. Make 2025 the year. With Shopify, your first sale is closer than you think. You know what I really love about Shopify? No matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Hey, established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/hopeful, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/hopeful to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/hopeful. I also want to share about a really great podcast we've been listening to called De Novo.
Listen now to a new series from Houses on the Moon Theater Company. On the streets of Guatemala City, gang members were Edgar's only family. But he dreamed of a different future.
Edgar, we're missing a player. You want to join us?
Sale. I like playing soccer. The guys from the gang didn't play soccer. They only stole and did drugs.
To leave the gang was a death sentence.
They want to kill him. What are we gonna do?
Coming to the U.S. was his only hope.
I don't want to go back to Guatemala. If I go back to Guatemala, they're going to kill me.
Your Honor, Edgar is now before you for his final chance to save his life.
De Novo is a new podcast series from Houses on the Moon Theater Company. Through real-life court transcripts and first-person interviews, De Novo tells the true story of a case that challenges the conscience of a nation. Listen now and subscribe to Houses on the Moon wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, let's return to my conversation with Elyssa Feder. So, of course, we are a democracy show that hopes to spark civic action, and organizing is a form of civic engagement. And there are, of course, many ways that people can get engaged, which may or may not be organizing. But what is the role of organizing in democracy? And what I'm really trying to get at is, can we have a democracy without organizing?
Wow, what a question. I'm going to answer that in a different way, which is that we have not built a democracy without organizing. Can we have a democracy without organizing? I haven't seen it, but I suppose theoretically it could be done. But I don't think that that's the reality that we live in. The reality that we live in is that the rights that most of us have were fought for by organizers. And the reality is that our future is going to be fought for by organizers. I think people, when they see a problem in their community, they want to do something about it. Sometimes that is a fleeting frustration, and sometimes it is a lifelong calling that leads to them training 4,000 people across the country in organizing. No matter what, though, people feel invested in their families and their communities and wanting to fight for a better future for them. So I don't know if a democracy is possible without organizing, but I also don't think that we're going to see a democracy without organizing.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Now that you have trained over 4,000 people, how have you changed in terms of how you think about organizing and what's possible?
I describe Rising Organizers as the best group project of my life. This was an accidental organization. It was a group of 25, 26, 27-year-olds who were reacting in a moment where we knew we had a set of skills that we could deliver to people. And I don't think that any of us saw it becoming the institution that it is now, least of all me. I ran it as a volunteer for 5.5 years. This only became a job with staff in 2022. And that speaks to, I think, the growing need for organizing in our communities. It has been truly one of the most powerful and impactful things I've ever done in my life. I mean, I've met people that I never would have met if I stayed in national policy. And I have seen the way that those people have gone on to impact literally hundreds of thousands of people across the country because of what they've learned with us. And it is genuinely, I cry about it, genuinely the most beautiful thing that I have gotten to be a part of. Yeah, it's just an honor to have this job. Oh. And so that's a great question. And I think the answer is actually everything about me has changed in doing this work.
Oh, that's really profound. And I'm glad that people like you are not only doing the work, but are so moved by the power of everyday people to organize. In terms of organizing, now that you've done this for so long, what do you think really packs the most punch when it comes to organizing?
Consistency. This gets to your gym analogy.
Right. Yeah.
I saw a tweet a couple months ago. I think about it all the time. And the tweet said, the Montgomery bus boycott lasted for 389 days. I think that's the right number.
Yeah.
And then it said,
people don't realize how long it lasted.
Yeah. And then it said, you all don't have the stamina. And I think about that every day. I said this, I quoted this tweet at our Organizing 101 training a couple weeks ago. And someone yelled out, that's over a year. And yeah, it's over a year. The problems that exist because they benefit someone. And that means that we need to be consistent and persistent in our pursuit of better lives for ourselves and our communities. The easiest way to fail as an organizer is to quit. There are all sorts of things that I can train you on how to build resilience and community and strategy and everything else that allows for you to be successful. But the most important thing is to remember that this takes way longer than it should. It is not right, it is not ethical for us to have to fight this hard and this long for the things that we deserve as not just Americans, but as people on this planet.
Oh, yeah.
And also, that's the reality that we have to deal with. And so consistency is hands down the most important thing.
Yes, totally agree. Well, the Trump 2.0 administration is upon us. We've made the case for organizing now. What's a priority that you're organizing around in 2025?
At Rising Organizers, we don't organize around specific issues with the exception of democracy in its broadest form. We believe that the people that we train are the best people to decide what are the issues that they should organize around, and they're very good at it. But as an organization, we care deeply about the future of our democracy, in the future of protesters' rights, in the future of civic engagement. And because we are primarily based in DC, though we have a foothold in other places, we are primarily interested in protecting DC's democracy right now. We have seen over the course of many years and many administrations on both sides of the aisle that DC's democracy is not always left up to the people of the District of Columbia. And that is under particular threat as we enter into this new administration. We have seen, again, on a bipartisan level, a lack of protections for DC's democracy. Our laws have been overturned by Congress before, and we have seen that the incoming administration has said that they are going to make DC the safest, cleanest, most beautiful place in the world, which frankly, I would argue it is already quite beautiful and safe. And also, I think that within that, there seems to be quite a bit of threat to DC's democratic processes because we're not a state. And so for us, we are thinking about how is it that we can best mobilize our skills, our resources, our people to defend DC's democracy so that the people who live here, no matter their background, have the ability to set policy for what happens here. And that is going to be our major policy push over the next few months.
Tell us a little bit more about how DC, because it is not a state, basically makes its citizens vulnerable to undemocratic actions from the White House or from Congress, because I think a lot of people don't really understand that, and I think would be really helpful for context in light of everything that you just said.
So DC is not a state. We have been granted what is called home rule for a number of decades now, which essentially means that our mayor, our city council can set legislation and rules for the people who live in the District of Columbia. Those things are subject to congressional oversight and at times have been overturned. However, by and large, we have been left to our own devices since the 80s. Because we have this specific rule, if a president or a Congress wants to interfere with the will of the people in the District of Columbia, they can do so with relative ease. And one of the things that is of great concern to those of us who care about DC's democracy is that we are not sure the state that home rule will stay in for this administration. It's probable, from folks who are real experts on this, they've told me that it's probable that they will not remove home rule because that requires passing a law and that's a lot of work, but rather restrict home rule to the extent that we are not actually able to make decisions for ourselves anymore. Something that no other state around the country is going to be subjected to. You're not, you can move things through the system to get the court to decide if this state or that state is correct on something, but the congressional oversight of the everyday laws of your state, you're not subjected to that. And so in D.C., that is the place where we are going to be seeing a lot of potential threats to democracy right here in the nation's capital.
So, well, if I were a resident of D.C., what is the kind of organizing that I should be doing right now then in order to prevent the worst outcomes? Because it sounds like you don't have a lot of power actually to do anything. Yeah. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So for residents of DC, this is where organizing becomes incredibly important. Organizing has historically always been done by people who did not have power in the moment where they started organizing. Women did not have the right to vote when they started organizing for the right to vote. Many of them got arrested. There are very famous examples of hunger strikes. We all were raised with stories of the civil rights movement. These were folks who were under threats of literal bodily harm, and many were murdered in the course of their pursuit of justice. We're trying to avoid that, obviously. Mm-hmm. But organizing doesn't start from a place of having power. It starts from a place of having a problem. And so that is why organizing, bringing people together, and acting outside of just engaging in the voting booth is so important for our democracy. And that exists here in DC particularly profoundly because of our unique status. But it also applies anywhere in the country where there is this gap between a just democracy and the way that we are being governed, which happens in a lot of places. And so organizing is going to be incredibly important for democracy here and writ large going forward. That's going to mean that as many of us need to get consistent, we need to figure out how we're going to plug in to the issues we care the most about and stay there. And of course, Rising Organizers, that's our job. We don't just train people. Like I mentioned, we also help you figure out where you're supposed to go and where your home is. And so right now we have a situation where we have folks organizing to protect DC in lots of different ways. And there are a lot of Rising Organizers folks who are involved in those efforts. And so we're excited to be a part of that as well.
So every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guest to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. What's a good way to turn the insights you've shared with us into action?
I would suggest that folks get clarity. What are the things that you are already good at? They don't have to be things that are necessarily organizery, right? Knitting has been used for organizing purposes before. What are you good at and what brings you joy? Because you're going to need to be consistent and persistent over the course of the next, decades, really.
Right.
We have a long time to go until we get to the promised land.
Yes.
And so,
or maybe we'll never get there. As we were talking about democracy and organizing, if we are thinking about democracy as a place where organizing will always have a place, then maybe the promised land is not something that we'll ever achieve.
I think that's probably right. And many organizers will talk about how, we're fighting for a world that we're not going to live to see. I hope to live to see something better and closer. I think that, organizing happens all the time and we have a lot of wins. But certainly it is something that it's going to be happening long after those of us on this podcast and those listening to this podcast are gone. So right now we're investing in our futures and we're investing in the futures of our children and grandchildren. So that's pretty beautiful. But the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we are really clear about what we love and who we love and how we're going to do this stuff for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. So if I were not in DC and I wanted to figure out a way to find a Rising Organizer training session or somehow plug into your network, what do I do?
We are going to be hosting a virtual Intro to Organizing training in early February, and we hope to follow that up with a whole bunch of virtual trainings for folks because we know that this is a resource that needs to exist all over the country. So the primary thing that folks can do to get engaged with us is to attend those trainings. People can also email us at info@risingorganizers.org, and I will personally help them figure out where in their community they should get involved. I kind of think of myself as an organizing concierge service from time to time. If you tell me where you are and the issue that you care about, I am very happy to help you find an organizing home. And so those are two free, accessible ways for folks to get more involved in organizing in general and to learn some skills with us.
Thank you. I love the personal organizing concierge concept. It is almost adjacent to the gym analogy.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. I'm a personal trainer for organizers, actually. That's actually a really
That's a good one. You should use that.
I am going to use that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I know you also have fellowship programs. Tell us a little bit more about those.
We have this great intensive fellowship program that is free to community members. We also have a staff program for people who are on staff at advocacy organizations. And that is a 9-session intensive free organizing program for people in the DC metro area. And we're hoping to expand it to other localities as we scale. So if folks are in the DC metro area and are interested in that program, the applications for our next fellowship class are due on January 21st, and that is also on our website.
Fantastic. So it feels like we are in a really perilous moment in democracy right now. But actually, one thing that I've been wondering is whether this isn't the ultimate opportunity to really make the United States a full and vibrant democracy. Because I think more and more people are interested in organizing and are interested in engaging or re-engaging in civic life. So I'm hopeful that Americans will seize that opportunity. But what about you? Looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
A lot of things make me hopeful, actually, depending on the day and my mood. But I think if you're an organizer, you have a sort of hope bug that is kind of hard to ditch. And so I am a naturally hopeful person, even on my bad days, I think, because I can look back on history and see the way that organizers have fought for us to get to this conversation. I think that people are most mobilized when they feel a sense of crisis. And there are particular moments in American history where crisis happens. We're in it now, and also sometimes organizers are able to bring a crisis to the forefront by saying this thing that you've always lived with is actually not okay, that you have the ability to change that thing. And so organizing is going to be such a crucial path forward. And I feel quite hopeful that as people start to see more of the fissures that pop up in our democracy and our society, fissures I wish we could avoid, I think that more people are going to start to get engaged to address those fissures. I always like to say there's a lot of pain and suffering that's coming our way that should not happen. It's immoral and it's wrong. And in the face of it, we have the choice of what we're going to do about it. And organizing provides the clearest path forward to addressing some of those harms.
Hear, hear. We're all into it. Thank you very much, Elyssa, for joining us on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Elyssa Feder is the Executive Director of Rising Organizers. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. Organizing is all about being consistent and persistent. We've seen change happen in our democracy time and time again, but the key ingredient in the organizing recipe is to play the long game. Stay engaged, one step at a time. Next week on Future Hindsight, we're joined by Monica Hopkins. She's the Executive Director of the ACLU of Washington, D.C., a branch of the American Civil Liberties Union that works with D.C. residents and supporters to protect and advance civil liberties and civil rights.
So much like any other ACLU affiliate, we litigate, we engage in the legislative process, and do public education. Here in D.C., we work with the D.C. Council and our court system. We are also a little bit different because the D.C. and the way D.C. runs is we have limited self-governance. So we also sort of watch what Congress is doing and how it would affect the residents of D.C. because of congressional oversight and interference in D.C.'s limited self-governance.
That's next time on Future Hindsight. Now, don't forget to hit that follow button on your podcast app. It's right there. This way, our episodes will stay in your rotation every week. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zach Travis and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,